Love rarely leaves like a soap opera. No final scream, no suitcase flying down the stairs. Most of the time it just disappears, quietly, like your favorite sock after laundry day. One morning, you realize they haven't asked how you slept in weeks, and the last time they touched you, it was to pass the remote. You're still in the same room, but the air feels colder, and not just because they turned off the heater again. There's no grand betrayal, just a slow, silent cancellation, like someone unsubscribed from your soul. It's strange how love ends, not with drama, but with dental appointments. You're still seeing Dr. Lee on Thursday. That's the most intimate thing you've shared all week. In Buddhism, they say everything that arises will pass away. What they don't say is, sometimes it passes away, while still making you coffee every morning, just without a smile. So today we're going to talk about something few people admit out loud, how love ends in silence before it ends in goodbye. And what the first signs really are, not the ones you yell about, but the ones you whisper to yourself in bed. It's going to hurt a little, but there will be humor. Because if we can't laugh at our abandonment, we'll start redecorating our sadness like it's a guest room. Let's begin. Sign 1. The inner garden closes no more emotional access. Love doesn't always end with a bang. Sometimes it just loses its password and never logs back in. You don't notice it at first. The coffee still gets made. The laundry still gets folded. They still sit next to you on the couch, just close enough that it counts as together, but far enough that you could fit a mild resentment in the space between. It starts small. You ask how their day was, and they say fine. You ask if they slept okay, and they say same as usual. You ask what's on their mind, and they say nothing. But here's the thing. No one has nothing on their mind after 60. We have regrets stacked like junk mail in our subconscious. This is the first real sign they stop letting you into their inner world. Once they gave you the backstage pass to their mind, you knew their fears, their fantasies. The weird way they hated cilantro. You were trusted, not just with their time, but their thoughts. That's intimacy, not touch, not sex access. But now, you're stuck in the waiting room of their psyche. The magazines are old and no one's coming out to get you. Buddhist psychology teaches us that each person's mind is like a garden. When we love someone, we tend that garden with care. We water their stories. We pull the weeds of worry together. But when someone starts falling out of love, the first thing they do is close the gate. Not loudly, not cruelly, but firmly, and with a smile. You still talk, but only about logistics. Did you pick up the medication? Don't forget your sister's birthday. What's for dinner? It's not connection, it's calendar sync. Let me tell you a story. There was an older man named Robert who had been married to his wife Diane for over 42 years. Every Sunday, they used to sit on the back porch and read to each other poetry, philosophy, sometimes even just cereal boxes for laughs. It didn't matter. The point was they were in the garden together. Then one day, Diane started reading alone. She still made him breakfast. She still kissed his forehead when she passed. But she stopped inviting him in. One Sunday he asked, "Do you want to read something together?" She said, "Maybe later." Later never came in elderly psychology. This is sometimes called emotional retirement. It's when one partner slowly checks out, not because of anger, but because their emotional energy has gone into storage. And like most things we store past 60, we rarely open the box again. It's not that they don't care. It's that they no longer need to share, and that's even more painful, because it means they've decided their inner world can survive without your reflection. And here's where it gets cruel. They're still kind, still courteous, still asking if you want sugar in your tea, but not once asking if your heart is okay. That's the trick. That's why so many people miss this first sign. When the garden gate closes, it doesn't make a sound. You just wake up one day and realize you're a visitor in a house you used to co-own. And if you try to force your way back in, if you push too hard, ask too many questions, beg to be let in, they won't get angry. They'll just say, "You're overthinking things." which is code for, I don't want to think about this with you anymore. Let them close the gate. Let it rust if it must. Your job is not to pry it back open. Your job now is to start tending your own garden again. Sign 2, the silent comparison begins. You're being graded without knowing it. You can feel it before you can prove it. They don't say it out loud because that would be cruel. No one sits across from you at breakfast and says, I think I'd be happier with someone who does yoga and remembers my birthday without Facebook. No silent comparison is much more elegant than that. It's in the eyes, in the way they look just a little too long at someone else's joy, in the way they say, that was sweet, after hearing about someone else's spouse who made soup from scratch. Meanwhile, you microwaved chili and got exactly 0 praise. Let's be honest, this is where it starts to sting. In elderly psychology, there's a phenomenon called emotional mirroring. When someone begins to feel emotionally unfulfilled in their relationship, they unconsciously begin to search for reflections of what they've lost. It's not always romantic, often it's nostalgic. They're comparing you not to a person, but to a feeling they had 20 years ago. But you're just trying to remember where you put your glasses. Buddhism would gently remind us comparison is suffering. When the mind clings to what is not, it cannot rest in what is. But tell that to someone who just watched their spouse grin a little too wide at the neighbor's joke. Let me tell you about Helen and Frank. Frank was a man of simple routines, toast with jam. Same blue sweater 3 days a week. He was solid, dependable, and just a bit emotionally deaf. Helen used to adore him for it. He's my rock, she'd say. But one day a friend came over recently widowed, full of grief and gratitude and unexpectedly charming. He told stories, he listened, he saw Helen. That night she looked at Frank differently. He didn't do anything wrong, he just wasn't anything new. When your partner starts comparing you, it's rarely about someone else, it's about the version of themselves. They feel slipping away, and whether or not you still help them feel like the person they used to be, here's where it gets dark. They'll still smile at you. Still thank you for taking out the trash, but that spark, that flicker of admiration, it's been redirected. And no, it's not cheating. It's worse, it's longing for what you're not. They start measuring your jokes, your clothes, even your posture against people who probably don't even know they've entered your marriage. You start to notice they light up in conversations with others in ways they haven't with you in months. You used to be the safe space. Now you're the background noise to their daydreams. The cruel irony, they might not even realize they're doing it, but you do. You feel it in your gut like an itch. You can't scratch. And when you bring it up, when you gently ask, is everything okay? They look confused, not because nothing's wrong, but because they've normalized the drift. In Buddhism, we're taught not to grasp at impermanence. But that doesn't mean we're immune to the ache of being replaced, even if the replacement is just a fantasy, wearing someone else's smile. So what do? You don't beg. You don't reshape yourself into a trendier version of who you were. You don't try to compete with ghosts, Instagram Reels, or that oddly charming barista down the road. You remember you are not a draft. You are not a placeholder. You are not in competition. And if they've stopped admiring you, stopped choosing you even quietly, then you have a decision to make. You can either try to win back a wandering gaze, or you can start looking inward where love isn't rented out to passing strangers. Sign 3, they're still there, but just polite. Now, this is perhaps the most sinister of the signs, not because it's loud, but because it's so quiet. You almost mistake it for kindness. They don't fight with you. They don't insult you. They still say please and thank you, maybe even sweetheart now and then. And that's exactly what should terrify you, because sometimes politeness isn't love, it's emotional hospice. You're not a partner anymore, you're a patient. They tuck you into their life, like a nurse folds a blanket. Gently, distantly, without warmth, but with procedure. You get compliments, but they feel like printed labels. You're so thoughtful, they say as you bring them tea. But their eyes are somewhere else, on the TV or the past, or on that version of you who used to make them laugh until they snorted wine out their nose. In elderly psychology, this is called affectionate detachment. It's when someone stays close in action, but has withdrawn in intention. They still perform the behaviors of closeness because it's routine, but the intimacy engine has been shut off. It's like living in a house where the lights still work, but no one's home. Let me tell you about Harold and Joan. They had been married for nearly 50 years. One day, Harold noticed that Joan had started addressing him like a well-behaved tenant. "Would you mind taking the trash out, darling? Thanks so much for the tea, love." At first, it warmed him, politeness. After years of grumbles and passive-aggressive sighs, this was progress. But then he noticed she wasn't teasing him anymore. She wasn't yelling about his snoring. She wasn't asking about his dreams. She had stopped being messy with him, the wild intimacy of emotional weather gone. She had become nice. And nice, my friend, is sometimes the kiss of emotional death. In Buddhist psychology, genuine love includes the willingness to suffer together. It includes irritation, growth, vulnerability, and conflict. It's not always tidy. Real love is awkward and unpredictable. It's a little chaotic, like your spice drawer. But when someone only ever shows you their polished face, when the messiness disappears, something's wrong, because nobody's perfect. And anyone who's pretending to be isn't really present, they're performing. And here's the kicker, they still care about you. That's what makes it so confusing. They bring you soup when you're sick. They fold your shirts with care. They make sure your favorite blanket is on the couch. But they no longer look you in the eyes when they do it. You've become a ritual, a habit, a to-do list item under things I should still be good at. You can feel it most during small talk. You tell them a story and they say, "That's nice," and it is, except it's not. Because what they really mean is, "I'm not listening, but I don't want to be rude." So what do? Don't confuse politeness with partnership. Don't confuse being taken care of with being chosen. They might still be walking beside you, yes. But if they've zipped themselves inside a coat of courteous emotional distance, you're not in a relationship, you're in a customer service transaction, and if you have to beg for warmth between the lines of "thank you" and "how was your day?" then you already know they're still here, but the part that loved you left quietly and held the door for someone else. On the way out. Sign 4, they're rewriting their life and you're not in it. They don't leave you, not physically. They still sleep beside you. They still sit at the same dinner table. They still say goodnight. But one a day you glance over at their planner. Yes, the same floral one they've used since 1997. And you realize something. You're not in it. Not on the weekend pages. Not in the summer plans. Not even as a scribbled footnote under groceries. You've been emotionally erased in pencil, and they didn't even bother to tell you. This is the 4th and final sign they're planning their life without you. It starts innocently. A new book club they forgot to mention. A vacation idea they bring up with friends, but not you. They update their emergency contact, and you find out it's not you anymore. It's your neighbor. Or worse, the dog groomer. Because he answers his phone more reliably. In elderly psychology, this is what we call pre-divestment behavior. It's not a conscious exit strategy. It's a soft disengagement. People begin to emotionally detach by reorganizing their life in small ways that reduce dependency on the partner they've already left in spirit. Buddhist philosophy would call this a form of non-attachment. But let's be clear, this isn't enlightened detachment. This is spreadsheet detachment. Let me tell you about Susan. Susan had been married to Dan for 37 years, one day while checking the family calendar. She saw he had penciled in a consultation with a state lawyer. When she asked about it, he smiled and said, "Oh, just updating things in case something happens." Something already had. He had started rearranging his life to function without her. He didn't ask her opinion anymore about finances, health decisions, retirement plans. It wasn't malicious, it was just already over in his mind. She was still in the house, but not in the blueprint of his future. Here's how it really shows up. They start making solo plans just to clear their head. They join new clubs but don't invite you. They start talking about downsizing, and you get the eerie feeling you might be what's being downsized. They're mapping a future in which you're no longer a main character, maybe a cameo, a friendly ghost, but not a co-star. And if you bring it up, if you say, "It feels like you're living your life around me, not with me," they'll say something devastatingly neutral, like, "I didn't think you'd be interested." Or worse, "I just didn't want to bother you." In Buddhism, we're taught that life is change, that nothing is permanent. But what they don't warn you about is how painful it is to realize that you've become the thing they're slowly shedding, like an old habit or a pair of shoes they don't wear anymore, but feel too guilty to donate. So what do? You don't beg to be re-added to the calendar. You don't sneak your name back into their future plans. Instead, you start your own. Because if someone is building a life that doesn't include you, the most loving and most rebellious thing you can do is build your own life and not leave room for resentment. If you've been quietly edited out of their next chapter, let them keep the pen. You've still got your story, and it's far from over. If you've seen the signs, the silence, the comparisons, the kindness that feels like customer service, the plans that no longer include you, don't panic. Just stop moving. Not out of surrender, but out of sacred stillness. In Buddhism, we're taught that clinging causes suffering, but no one tells you how hard it is not to cling when the person letting go still hands you your morning coffee and asks if you fed the cat. But here's the truth. If someone is walking away from you and spirit chasing them, won't bring them back. It'll only make you lose yourself. So sit in the silence, in the awkward, in the weird half-love that still texts, "Okay," but stop saying "I miss you," and then don't beg, don't shrink, don't harden. Just stay sacred, tend to your breath, water your own garden, wear your softest sweater, and speak kindly to the parts of you that feel unworthy. Because the hardest thing in love isn't being left, it's realizing you forgot you had worth even when they were still there. So if you're being rewritten out of someone's story, let them write. You've got your own pages to fill, and this time you get to be the main character.